all for joining us. We have glass in between us.
Yes.
And our guest today is David Gindy with One of a Kind Collectibles and Magic Camp.
Exactly.
Let's talk with Magic Camp because that's how I met you.
Yes.
Years ago, I actually saw you. Before I met you, I remember your mother sitting on cars, all right, waving like this. She had a very look-alike face, and she had the posture, and she had this down, all right?
Of the Queen.
Of the Queen. I'm
Yes.
sorry, the Queen. Who else?
She looked like her.
By the way, my family, Susan's family's from England, and so we talk to them all the time, and we watch all the Queen stuff.
Sure.
So David, you got into magic at a very young age. So tell us about that.
Yes. Well, actually, at the age of 7, I saw a famous magician named Ricciardi, and I was so, in love with the art of magic. I mean, I really enjoyed it. Just like most children that age, they get a set. I probably just was a little more excited about it, and I would practice certain tricks. And my mom, being the person she was, what she loved entertainment, she was a dancer and a singer. She got me backstage and with Ricciardi. And he was nice enough to say if I wanted to perform next time he came, he would let me be part of the show. And so actually, this is like 1977. I was part of the show when he came back, and it was at the Carnival Hotel in Miami Beach.
So sometimes you get really lucky and you have somebody that puts their hand out for you.
Right.
All right, not a handout, but put your hand out for you to bring, so they can bring you along. So certainly he did that. And
yeah, that's it's always like you said with certain things, especially with children and all that. There's a spark sometimes, and that was the spark that lit a fire, and that's why you never know what takes, right? And it was something that I loved, and I was actually doing shows at 7, and I remember even in my advertisements, it would say only for children up to age 8 because I didn't want someone to be bigger than me.
So when you would do shows, where were those? At people's homes?
Actually, they were at people's homes, and they were even at different locations. I remember even there was a Hardee's restaurant in Kendall, and upstairs they had a party room.
Was the word precocious, sort of?
Well, it was fun. It was, and like I said, in the advertising scheme, when I was putting out my flyers, I was just like, I didn't want children too much older than me because, you're thinking, I don't want a 10-year-old watching.
So 7 years, that's first or second grade.
Correct.
In the COVID environment, who knows what grade you might be in.
Yeah.
Kindergarten at this point.
Exactly.
All right. So, so that's been a passion of yours for 40 years.
Yeah, over 45 years.
40.
Yes.
And we're going to talk later on about Magic Camp and how you adapted to the COVID. You had another passion that you developed about the same age.
Yes, well, at the same age, I was doing those shows we're talking about, and I loved history. That was my favorite subject, and I was learning about James Madison, and the first 10 amendments and things of that nature. And I went to an antique show, and I saw.
At what age?
At about 7 years old.
And your dad, your mom?
It was with my dad and my mom at the time. And I saw a framed, what they would call a free framed, which is an envelope that's signed by the president to go in the mail. So it would go in the mail for free. They would sign the top corner, and that way they wouldn't have to pay postage. And it was signed by James Madison. And I was learning about him in school. And I said, wow, that's amazing. It's a piece. It's the person who's writing the Declaration of Independence, the first 10 amendments, the Federalist Papers, all these things. And it's signed by him. And I ended up buying it with the money that I had made during doing magic. And that was my first purchase, was the James Madison.
And that was 40 some odd years ago.
That was a little while ago as well. That was 45 years ago. Yeah.
That's amazing how in this case where you remember those things that helped spark your career.
Yes, and I still have them. That signature. And what's interesting is,
wait, say that again.
I still have the autograph of James Madison.
The same one.
The same one.
The same one for 45 years.
For 45 years.
You hear that, folks? 45 years been holding on to this. Right?
Well, it was,
of course.
The first.
Of course.
And I loved it. And from there, there was a gentleman named Charles Hamilton, who was very well known as an autograph dealer in New York in the 70s. Actually, he goes back to the 50s. And I would be buying autographs from him.
At what age?
As 7, 8, 9 years old. Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So you developed this passion, this desire to do it pretty early, and you've worked it. So you're pretty. You must be a pretty smart guy as far as history.
Well, I'm okay. I have my memories for things, especially when you own it or you have it in your possession. You learn about it. You learn more about it. Yeah.
So your what do you call it? Your frame of reference on a lot of these things, you either know it ahead of time,
Yes.
or you found it and you keep studying it. So you have lots of things that you know on
Right.
what's the word? These collectibles that you would call these in general?
Well, I mean, they would be in the collectible side, but there's philatelic, which is the stamps, and then there's, of course, autographs and documents, photography. There's the rare books. So in all of these fields, I of course grew, because what I love about autographs and documents and all of these pieces is they each tell a story.
And do you know the story behind your pieces?
Well, we try, and in a lot of them we do, and it's like it. Malcolm Forbes, who of course was a great collector, collected everything pretty much. I mean, he collected rare ship models, and he collected planes. Probably, I mean, he actually said his favorite of all his collections was the autographs, and they sold his collection for many millions of dollars when he had passed. But he had felt that because he was not only owning a piece, but it was holding a piece of history. And so each one's telling the different story. And that's what's interesting.
So some people can find out more about your one-of-a-kind collections or at...
Yeah, one-of-a-kind collectibles.
Yes.
And we're on Coral Gables. But you can go to Oak Auctions, which stands for, one-of-a-kind, OAKauctions.com. And you can see the auction that we actually have one ending tomorrow night.
Well, how about that? All right.
Yes.
So I watch Pawn Stars. That's PAWN, Pawn Stars.
Right.
All right. And then there's a show on WLRN where these auctioneers or the appraisers go around and they appraise stuff.
Right.
And everybody has a story about some of this old stuff.
Correct.
And just let me ask you, on the TV show, I just want to know,
right,
do they rehearse the history behind each piece before they start filming?
I
Or
think
do these guys know all that stuff?
Well, I think it depends, but you would notice it in a lot of them. They even said it, like on the road show, for example. You'll see where they said, "Well, we conferred with the experts, and then they get them on TV, at that moment,
Yes.
and then they tell them the story, what they found out." So I think some of it, they find out a little more information, because it would be hard to know all auction trends and everything else prior to being able to.
The things that I watch on the road, is that what it's called?
The road show.
The road show. Yeah. I see a lot of furniture and some things. And so a lot of the stuff, range from $500 to $20,000. Right. And do the stories of the owner of the item match up with what the appraiser or the auctioneer?
Yes. Well, most of the time they do, and hopefully, and what happens is you're talking about also the provenance, which is the history of a piece, and that matters. Who owned it? And why was it owned? I mean, and did he have it made? And so depending on, because remember, that's part of the story. And what's exciting is that I appraise documents and autographs and stamps and coins, and
you appraise them.
Yes, because being actually over 40 years in many of the facets of autographs, or the specialists, in different portions, especially historical and manuscripts and rare books. Over the years, you get a pretty good knowledge base.
Okay.
Yes.
And David, you're nice enough to bring us along some of your pieces. So why don't you go ahead and pick whatever piece you want, and you're gonna look at it, and you're gonna face it towards the camera.
Absolutely.
So people that are watching are gonna get a chance.
Well, I just brought a few, because obviously there's hundreds of pieces in our upcoming auction. But this is a beautiful one. I mean, if you like Marilyn Monroe, you can see it's signed clearly. And what makes it interesting is actually that it was obviously someone that was very dear to her, because it was to Bob. And it says, "Love and kisses, and I think you're wonderful," and Marilyn Monroe. And this is, one of these pieces that you can see just the quality. This is 1953. And the photo is actually right when she was doing Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And you could just see this sultry, just her presence in front of the camera, which is really why I think she's so iconic today.
And she died when?
Well, it's 60s.
Well, which time?
60s. I'm sorry.
Which time did she die? She actually committed suicide.
Yes. Right.
And what year was that?
Oh, I'm not sure the exact year, but I mean, I know it was, obviously in the 60s, and of course it was an overdose. Of course, like everything.
That is some, folks. That is some photograph. When you look at that,
right,
and you see the look in her eyes and her face,
yes,
and then everything we've heard about her sort of rushes in at that moment.
Well, that's the thing. If you look, I'll show one more time, just because it's such a beautiful photo, and it is quite rare to have such a nice photo signed as like that. But like everything, they all tell a story. And another example is this, of course, is one of my favorites. Now, it's small here. I don't know if you can see it, but this is Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln is sending his signature to when he just got elected to be president, as president-elect. And he signed it. And he signed it and he says, I'm sending you my signature. And then he signs it below. So that's nice. Now, what's interesting is the letter itself, the written portion, is actually in John Hayes, which was his secretary at the time. And then A. Lincoln is signed by Abraham Lincoln.
And folks, it's a very finite, thin pen on a signature.
Yes. I mean, they used to use, and this is called gull ink. It's that like brown ink, and it was made, it's the old-fashioned type of ink. And like you said, this is the old type of pen. I mean, they would use the quill earlier, then they used the fountain pen. And this is the kind of information that, of course, it wouldn't apply to a Lincoln, but knowing about inks and paper and all these different things are how you attribute different things, make sure that they're real and everything else.
So somebody wrote in just now, they wanted to know on that Lincoln thing, more or less, what at an auction, at a public auction,
right?
More or less, what would be you think that would sell for?
This one would be between $6,000 and $8,000 because it is a letter signed by
US
Lincoln.
Dollars.
Yeah, US dollars.
That's $6,000 to $8,000. Where
right.
are we over here? Okay.
Right, and even the Marilyn Monroe would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $11,000 to $14,000 for a photo of that nature. So they're quite rare and desirable.
Oh, here we go.
Everything's I think this, I just brought, I mean, we had in the last auction, I had Babe Ruth signed photos and everything, but just to tell you, like, we're talking about different types of things. This is a photo of Babe Ruth, of course. This is a classic, he's swinging his bat there. This is the 20s. And one of the things about photography is the collecting now, which is relatively new in the way there are different classifications for the type. So this would be a type 1 photo, which means it's of the period. It was being sent to the newspaper. It's a photo taken that was distributed to be put in newspapers, which I'm sure you know about. And they call that a type 1 because it means it's the period. It wasn't a print at a later time or after, 10 years later or things of this nature. And one way you can tell is right on the back of the photo, you'll see where it says, please credit Acme Photos and please, and everything else. And so
it actually says that, photo by Acme, right. News Pictures Inc., please credit Acme Photos.
Exactly. And then you see, of course, Babe Ruth, the slugger, doing his thing.
And he a great baseball player, and it looks like he's ready to fall over there. The way he's got his legs twisted around.
Yeah, he's just that you can see that's what makes that photo great too. You could also see that was right after that swing. That's all the power was just displayed, and he's he did his rotation, and it's off. It's on the way. It's probably a home run.
Somebody else wants to know, how do you know that these are real?
Well, that's a great question. Well, first of all, that's part of being in the business for over 40 years. People do come to me for that, but to let you know, on a lot of items, we also get a third-party opinion. Just because, autographs, it's not a science in a sense. I mean, there is a science to it, understanding about the ink and everything, but there's also the opinion of looking at the ink and looking at the style and making sure the paper and all these things are right. Just like, for example, ballpoint pens, they weren't even around till like 1943. So if something's signed with a ballpoint pen in 1940, it's not correct because it didn't even exist at that time.
And you can, a professional can tell.
Well, a professional can tell inks and everything like that. But also, just for example, this is a Lincoln. The Lincoln piece has what they call a letter of authenticity by JSA, which is an authenticator. But what's interesting about the Lincoln, I can even go further with it in the sense that actually came from an album. And this album was still in its original envelope. And that original envelope, I don't know if you can see it, says Walter Benjamin.
What year is that?
This is probably, let's see, what year is this? This is probably 72, it looks like, 1971, 1972. Well, Walter Benjamin is actually considered one of the founders of the autograph collecting industry. And he was a dealer. Mary Benjamin actually was with him too, which is part of it. But Walter R. Benjamin was one of the first dealers in the country. Actually, they go back and this album is signed by many other individuals, and that's where the Lincoln actually came from.
And how old is this book?
This book, is when the Lincoln came. There's Civil War papers in here and things of that nature. This is 1860s.
The book itself.
Yeah, the book and the autographs within it. Right.
1860, folks.
Right. So, with anything, we were talking about this story, the provenance. And that's why you see, I even, we would keep the envelopes and things like that that relate to it, because that tells you the story. Now, with that, we even have documents from much earlier, which is, let's say, 16th century there. This is Henry IV. And, it's signed, and this is on parchment. And, you can look at the ink, you can look at the pen, you can look at what it says and everything else. Now,
are you the kind of guy that gets called in at Pawn Store and they say, we need a pro to come look at this?
Pretty much, yes, locally. Okay. I haven't been flown to California yet. But, there's a knowledge. But, yes, there's actually even a couple local people who've got in coin shops and they have something come in. And
when I watch that show, when the professional comes in, there's this silence that everybody's waiting, right? Which is and you listen to them. They go step by step by step,
right, and
going over each of the factors to determine whether it's authentic and all the things that they look for in that.
Well, and when you look at items, at least when I do, I look at it in a different way. I look at that it's not real until it's proven real, in the sense that I'm not already thinking, oh, it's real, let me see what's wrong. So when I look at something, I'm looking at the signature, like I said, the ink, the paper, the document, everything that makes it up. And also, when you deal with something for over 40 years, even as a child, when you're handling enough of it, you can actually spot it quite a ways. I can see an Amelia Hart if it's maybe not exactly correct from a distance.
What is this?
Oh, well, this is Henry. This is actually Henry Wells and James Fargo. This is an American Express certificate signed by both of them. And of course, they're of Western fame. But it goes across the gambit as far as all the different things. For example, so we're talking about the West. We're talking about Henry IV. We got Marilyn Monroe. We got Abraham Lincoln. And remember, we were talking about how do you learn? Well, as I get these pieces, as well as just enjoy studying it, you learn about it. So this came in the other day, and this is interesting because actually it was a group of letters, but this is just one of them. And it even had a little photo here, which I don't know if you can see, but it's a little passport photo. And then there's actually a little, this is a message sent, memogram. This is, let's see, 1935. And it says, arrived today, letters received, will write you at length. And it says, love, Raoul. And the letter, now this might not be known by everybody, but as far as the person's name, but this is Capablanca. Jose Raul Capablanca. And inside, of course, is a letter written by him. Well, Capablanca is considered one of the greatest chess players that ever lived. And now with chess being more popular, even when there was a Netflix series, Queen's Gambit, that came out recently, there's been even a renewed interest in chess. So this is actually a love letter from Raul Capablanca to his wife. And he was sending the photo and everything because they were about to go on trips. This is what year? I know you said this is 30s, 1935. He was also in the 20s. He was considered one of the greatest players. He could play simultaneously 32 players and win. So not just play. So it's the reason I'm mentioning about that is you see we're going from the chess to the Western to you name it, you're learning something. This is an interesting letter that came in the other day. This goes a little different direction.
By the way, I've been doing this for a while. We've done hundreds of interviews. Yes. I'm spellbound. Right?
That's the magic, or is it the autographs? No, I appreciate it. Well, what's interesting is that, like I said, there's stories behind, and that's why I don't know how long we have, but no, we could go into all the interesting things. Now, this is a Winfield Scott letter. Now, Winfield Scott, this is Civil War. He was one of the old, he was the general that was tapped to be in charge of the armies in the beginning by Lincoln, because he was there during World War 1812. He was there, in the 1840s, the Mexican War. And then, of course, this is a Civil War. And the reason I'm mentioning that is he was only in charge in the beginning. And this is 1861, May 18th. Now you have Fort Sumter, which was in April. So this is the start of the Civil War. Now, what makes this letter really interesting and important is it's not just a letter. It's a letter where he's sending marching orders to Fort Monroe to one of his generals. And the general ends up being one of the generals that ended up doing everything. Now, what makes this...
There wasn't texting back then?
Important. No, there wasn't texting. And he's telling you, and he says right here, if you pull it out, I want to show you something interesting here. Not only is it 1861, he has, where does he have where it has the general orders? He's basically saying right here, go to Hampton Road and take over and everything like that. And this is to Benjamin Butler, who is also known as the Beast. He had quite a reputation. He was one of the first generals to be a brigadier general in the Civil War. And this is one of the first posts that was, Fort Monroe was very important at the time. Now, why this is so interesting is this letter sending him to Fort Monroe is May 18th, 1861. He lands at Fort Monroe. I mean, he gets there, not lands by plane, but he gets there about 5 days later, about May 24th, May 25th. And the day he gets there, some runaway servants or slaves from the Confederates run into the fort and say, will you take care of us and protect us? Now, before this moment that we're talking about, which this letter relates to in some sense, because this is actually the letter sending him there, they would have always returned them. They would always say, no, you can't come in. You have to go back to the Confederates. At this time, he said, no, you can stay with us.
How do you know all of this?
Well, this became the contraband law. This actually went to Lincoln.
But on so many things. These are randomly selected out of your group of
yes
stuff. It wasn't your you don't go on the road with these 10 things.
No, I just pulled some things quickly. But when you enjoy it, I guess it's something you're passionate about. It is exciting, and it's exciting to own. And these are parts of history. And that ended up being the first time that they learned that if they worked for the Union, that they could be under their protection, which ended up being related to the Emancipation Proclamation later, because Lincoln was involved in this at the first time when he said he had the right to keep them. And Benjamin Butler said that, they came on a flag of truce. The Confederates came over to the
University of Miami, hire this guy. All right, he's available, very part-time. All right,
I'm ready. So it's fun. There's a little of everything, but we're talking about. I don't want to go too far into it, but this is actually a lease for land for Stephen Mitchell in Georgia. But what's interesting is he ended up signing it over to his daughter and the son, which is Margaret Mitchell, which you might know from Gone with the Wind,
yes,
the writer, and she signed it because she had the rights for it. And
so that's a very famous photograph you're about to show us.
Well, and this is it's in the plastic just to protect it. It's really just the autograph portion on this one, but it is Gandhi, of course, and there's a signature here, and it has a certificate as well. But I don't rely on certificates. Most of my material, it's basically I'm authenticating it. But sometimes they come with certificates. You have Gandhi, you have Winston Churchill.
Let's see the one at Churchill.
You have Albert Einstein. And the Winston Churchill on the top of this, I took it out of the mat to see. It's actually on his official stationery, sending his signature. So we were talking about autographs and documents and how they all tell a story. Well, also, on top of that, I also mentioned about books. And there's all types of books, but I felt that there's one, well, here, I'll show you two that I think would be of interest. One is, this is a book by Picasso, on Picasso's art, and it's a limited edition. So it is signed by Picasso. This is actually just the cover, but you can see the book is inside of it, and it's signed on what they would call the limitation page. But one of the rarer books, or something that's rare, that's pretty uncommon, but this is a book that's quite unusual. And let me see if I can pick it up. It weighs a couple pounds here. And it's Libra Scriptorium. You see it? And this was printed by the first Authors Club. Now, the first Authors Club comprised of about 180 authors. And in them was Mark Twain and Samuel Clemens, Theodore Roosevelt, Andrew Carnegie, and a lot of other authors that wouldn't be as famous today.
You have an audience for this? For doing this? You ever done this?
What?
Take your pieces and have a group of people? And
I haven't.
We're going to work on that
before.
All right? This is very intriguing. All right?
Thank you.
And your breadth of knowledge about so many things is astonishing.
Thanks.
I've known David probably 20 years.
A couple of years, yeah.
Yeah, maybe a
Believe it or
little
not,
longer.
Actually, you'd be surprised. 35.
Oh, well, 20, 35.
Days.
A few months ago, you showed me a photograph of Rosa Parks as she was
Yes.
being fingerprinted.
Yes.
And And it's like it's in the back of my head all the time now.
Really?
Which when you look at that, as you can look at some of these things, you have all this stuff that comes to life inside you, and all the history that has occurred.
Well, you're 100% right, and that's where I don't want to just talk about the autographs in a sense, because what happens is it relates to everybody has their interest or their love. Or maybe it's science. I have Einstein letters talking about protecting doctors or the theories of relativity, or and then you have I had Marilyn Monroe's lock of hair, to give you an example. And some of these things do quite well because they're great investments too. Just like I said, Malcolm Forbes, it was his favorite, and they go up in time. A lot of them. Sometimes they don't. They hold their own. But interesting enough, they have been pretty good over the period of time if you watch.
So for I don't know if there's an average collector, but somebody, where do folks put these very delicate items? Do they display them in their home? They have them in a safe? How do they do that?
I think it depends on the collector. Some of them do put them up, they try to frame them and everything, which you do have to be careful, make sure they're not in direct sunlight and things like that. That will affect it over time, direct light. If they keep them in the darker area, that'd be good. Make sure moisture doesn't get to it, of course. But with them, the most important thing I think is to be able to enjoy them. And so it is nice if you can put them up someplace nice, or if you have a book that you can look at. You have to be careful. And when we were talking about these books, these are signed, the Mark Twain and the Clemens. This is signed by every author that we just mentioned. So Mark Twain signed this book, and Theodore Roosevelt, and
that book is signed
by every author we mentioned. Yeah, Theodore Roosevelt signed this, and Clemens after their stories, and Theodore Roosevelt. And this is like 1884 to 1889 period. So this is the it's quite a rare book. There was only 250 of them made.
So would you care to share how much that might sell for at auction?
Well, that should be between $4,000 and $6,000 for that one. And sometimes they can go for less, of course, different types.
So the enjoyment of that, it's not like a diamond where you might wear it. Here, because it's so delicate, you don't want to be flipping through it like.
Yeah, you have to be careful with that. And when you hold a book, you want to make sure, I was holding it a little bit, you want to make sure that you're kind of like almost like a baby. You're cradling it, so when you open up the cover, you're not hurting the binding and everything else, because you want it to be nice.
So tell us how an auction.
Yes.
You're having an auction when?
Yes, that's tomorrow night
at 8
p.m.
So how does that work?
Well, actually, what's great, luckily, we have the ability to be online. And we've been doing online auctions for a while. And so the bidding actually is online. At 8 p.m., you go right on, and you can actually bid on any of these items.
And when they would go here?
You would just go to Oak Auctions, OAK Auctions.
And so how do the people, are you going to be doing it? Or the auctioneer?
Okay. This is a little different.
Do you do an auction conversation?
I don't do
can you rattle?
I don't do the bit of it. We don't do that.
I see, he just did a little bit.
We don't do that one.
He can do it, Tommy.
The
don't let him get away with it.
If you go to Sotheby's, Christie's, and these, you'll find that they do more of the traditional, like, going once, going twice, 500 to you, sir. But everybody's going towards the internet, not just because obviously the times we're in today, but it is just a natural progression to be able to. I have people in France, China, Germany, England bidding. And so it's a timed auction in a sense. It's live and timed in the sense that it's you're able to bid on an item. You can watch your item, and
how long have online auctions been going on?
Well, they've been on for a while, but they've definitely caught on more lately. I mean, the last couple of years too, of course.
So COVID's probably increased that pretty dramatically.
Yes. Well, I think a lot of people are sadly, at home, and it gives them the ability they're working at home, and the computer is a way to be able to do it, and they can get something they cherish and they love, which is also an investment. So it's a little of everything. It's not just an item. Now, I always say buy what you enjoy. Don't worry about the value is important too, but if you always buy something you enjoy and you love, you're always going to be happy with it.
Yes. So I've been around exotic animals for a long time. And
sure.
So somebody might show me their bird, or I see a group of them. And then as soon as I look at it, I got all the stuff that I know is rattling in,
sure.
Right? So that's the closest I can get to that, or newspapers or videos,
right.
Where you get to see that. And everybody has their level of expertise.
Right.
This here, there's such a wide range.
Right.
I mean, they're virtually A lot, dozens and dozens of these.
It's the hundreds, and it's.
Oh, I didn't say that, but you know.
No, of course. But you know what it is it's the difference is that when you do this, like you said, for a long time, you get to know, and also that fact that I'm an auctioneer, I'm getting material more than I could possibly purchase, of course. And I'm getting items through my last auction. I had George Washington letters from 1776, trying to defend New York. And so these items, you're getting all these unusual items and you learn more.
For people that are not in that arena,
right.
This is unbelievable, right? I can, you could actually go for an hour. I could sit here. I know nobody else will, right?
But I don't want to overdo it.
Right? Because when you can look at it, right, and you feel it and you touch it and you can see the stuff, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, it is something. I think when you'd say, I'm holding something that Abraham Lincoln wrote, or and remember he held it as well, of course, to write on it. So it's an attachment in some ways. And even I was mentioning with the Marilyn Monroe, I had a Marilyn Monroe lock of hair, and it actually went for a good amount. And that's the fun part of the auction. It went for about $10,000 to $11,000 at the time.
How big was that?
It was a lock, but it was a pretty thick lock. It was by her hairdresser. He made a specially created thing for it, And a person I know had one other one, which, hopefully maybe one day. And it ended up going to a gentleman from Switzerland. And that's why I was saying the thing about the internet we were talking about. And this was years ago. And he bought it. And I had to ask. I said, you bought a piece of hair. Is there a reason? What was your interest? And he's a famous photographer. And he said he met her when he was young. And he always loved her. And he wanted something to remind him of her. And that was it. So it goes back to what we were talking about. It wasn't just the value of the hair or this or being, it was a memory for him. It was an attachment to something he really.
So I have a print up on the wall with the Beatles and Muhammad Ali. And when I look at that, it just takes me right back to the 60s, right? And 70s. And I look at it every day. I'm going, oh yeah. And it's a great feeling that you have inside when you can look at it. And and when you can look at this and you realize this is real history, right? And if you're a history buff, this has got to be extraordinary, which you obviously are. I'm gonna speak to your agent about getting some gainful employment for you at one of the upper schools, FIU, University of Miami, University of Florida.
I actually, and I did bring you mentioned even my son, Benjamin, at his school, I brought, I had the patent for the light bulb for Thomas Edison, and I had Indian land grants and Roman tablets, and so when they were talking about different subjects, I would bring it in for the children, and they did love it. I mean, adults love it just as much too.
We have, as you know, some old newspapers hanging in the back from World War II picked up, and we show people those, and it's extraordinary.
Yeah,
I've seen them, hundreds of times. So every once in a while, I'll stop and really look at that.
Right.
We have Japs, declare war, Japs in, Japs out. We have something that says communists.
It's a moment of history.
Yes.
Each one of those represent, a little part of time, right? A little, and a snippet of time. And that's what's interesting about all this too. And it depends. Now, remember, I have the Beatles. Beatles are popular now because the people probably relate to the Beatles when they were growing, the baby boomers in a sense. And then we have Charles Chaplin and different individuals like that. And it does change over time sometimes because not the historical items, not scientific, because Einstein's always going to be Einstein. But some of when it comes to entertainment, that does change over time because maybe not as many people are familiar with, Tim McCoy and Charles Chaplin and, the early Humphrey Bogarts and Clark Gable and Gary Cooper and Tom Hanks.
How old is your son?
14.
One day he's going to know how smart you are. All right. I'm sure he doesn't know now, but in a few more years. All right.
Sure.
So, David, it's been a pleasure talking with you. We really want you to come back. All right.
Sure.
And we're going to look for a gig for you. All right, folks, this is this is the real deal. All right. David Gindy, one of a kind collections. You can find out more at oakauctions.com. And you can go take a look. And also tomorrow night, you have an auction.
Yes.
This is the real deal. And again, you can reach David Gindy. You can find him online and you can call him if you like. And so the phone, ways to contact you as well.
Yes, it should be right on the website. Please feel free at 305-661-4244 or even the oakauctions.com. And thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
And we're going to talk about Magic Camp later on. All right, folks, again, our guest today is David Gindy with One of a Kind Collections. And as a friend, and we're glad that he's here today and glad that we can help out. And there's Isabel way over there. Hey, Isabel, I'm supposed to do something. Is it time to eat? Maybe it's time to eat. Again, This is live with Miami's Community News. Thank you for joining us. And Tommy, thank you very much for producing the show.